when you're filming things like plants and stuff like that, it just takes a lot of time, and you want to get as much footage as you possibly can out of it. So one of the things I was interested in was their multi-lapse setup, to where you could actually film and take 3 different movement arcs and all at the same time.
CineD, your digital cinema tech resource, supported by B&H and CVP.
Welcome everybody to this video interview with Eric Kessler and Chris Field in the US. How are you guys?
Doing good.
Yeah, not bad.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. I asked you guys to come on to talk about the CineShooter Plus. That's your latest motion control product, Eric. And you have a quite interesting story with Chris. And I think we should dive right in. So how did Chris make your life difficult?
Thankful that he did, actually. But originally, Chris was one of our customers, and at the time it was Tim and Jason that was taking care of our tech calls. And Chris was continuously calling in with basically saying our gear wasn't doing what he was wanting it to do. And it was quite often. And, it was because of the work that he was doing. It was so intricate, I guess I think is the right word for it, and very scientific and specific, that our gear just really wasn't doing what he was wanting it to do. Our gear was adequate for 99% of people's uses, but the kind of work that Chris does at Biolabs over there is quite amazing. It's very strenuous on gear, and it needs ultra precision. And it just got to be where it was almost, I don't know, I'm probably exaggerating, but it seemed like it was every couple of days, if not maybe more, that Chris was coming to us saying that, it's not doing this. It was bugs in the software or things that the software didn't do. I don't remember exactly what the issues were, but behind the scenes, I was almost like, telling the guys, we should just buy this gear back because, this guy I didn't know at the time is like, really taking hours upon hours. And, maybe our gear just wasn't designed to do what it was that he was wanting it to do. And it had gotten, kind of frustrating on our back end, our side from tech support, because, what he was wanting, we just hadn't really developed our gear for doing that. But rather than doing that, I got on the phone with Chris and really took a few minutes to understand exactly what it was he was trying to do. And instead of walking away from it, I invited Chris to be part of our development. And so, we had quite a few conversations. I understood better what it was that he was trying to achieve with our gear. And we went to the drawing boards, and we meticulously, alongside of Chris, went step by step with feature sets and software, bugs that he was finding that we didn't know that were even there. And it became a wonderful friendship, I think. And we made our gear better because of Chris. He really pushes his work and his skill set and, desire for perfection really just, drove us and to meet his expectations of what he was wanting to do his work.
Chris, so how was it to get a call from Eric Kessler telling you he wants to buy all your gear back because you've taken too much time of his support people on the phone?
Yeah, he never actually offered to buy it back. I probably would have taken him up on the offer at that moment, but I appreciate that rather than just trying to buy it back, he wanted to make it right. So a lot of the work that I do, especially when it comes to time-lapse, I'm not shooting for, half an hour, 45 minutes, or even an hour a day. Generally, I'm going about, in the short run, about a week up to maybe about 3 to 4 months. So trying to get everything set up and have things run stable for like that extended period of time is generally a challenge with pretty much any system that I've run into with it. But I remember when he called me up, I was thinking like, oh crap, I really pissed him off this time.
Tell us a little bit more about what the kind of work we do. We can overlay this with some B-roll shots of your beautiful cinematography, but it's really something that, is not an everyday kind of work for a DP, I guess.
Yeah, so the work that I was trying to do at that point was I was trying to link a couple of their second shooter systems together to give extra degrees of movement. Because at that point, I had a little area above my workshop that I was turning into a little micro filming stage. And I wanted to be able to shoot some mushrooms up there. And I had this crazy setup to where I actually had, I think it was 5 axis of movement. I had a lift as well as left and right, and then pan, tilt, and focus. And then I was running another system, like basically racked up on top of it in order to get as much footage as possible. Because when you're filming things like plants and stuff like that, it just takes a lot of time. And you want to get as much footage as you possibly can out of it. So one of the things I was interested in was their multi-lapse setup, to where you could actually film and take 3 different movement arcs and all at the same time. So it would take the first image, and then it would move over to the image, the first image to the next movement, and then the first image to the next movement. And then at the end of the day, I should have 3 complete time lapses on there. So I was using their Chaos program and putting all this stuff together. And I would just, occasionally run into these little issues. But, most people, when they're going to be buying equipment like this, they're probably not going to be putting it through such a grueling test. And in this case, I was doing several different types of mushrooms, and you have this mycelium block, and when it's ready to go, it's going to go. So you need everything to be ready at that moment, because even losing a few hours of time, especially that early in the stage, absolutely shows up in the resulting footage.
Give us a little bit more background for people who are not familiar with a lot of your work. So basically what you do is doing super long form time lapses of plants growing, right?
Yeah. I got into time-lapse probably about 12, maybe 13 years ago. It was right around that time where the Timescapes video from Tomla was released. And at that point, I was getting into astrophotography. And I saw that, and I saw that there was that Milky Way behind the tortured tree, and absolutely just fell in love with the idea. But I didn't have a lot of money at that point in time, so I couldn't really afford the equipment needed for it. But I could afford the raw components, and I started figuring out how to build things and put things together myself. Over time, I started selling these time-lapse rails, but it wasn't making me much money. It was a lot of effort on my side, and I still had a full-time job. So I ended up kind of letting that go by the wayside. And it was around the winter time where I really just kind of let that go. And I had several time-lapse sliders, and I was looking for something to do with them. And I didn't want to, I was just too lazy, basically, to go out into the freezing cold of Colorado in February and go hike up into a mountain with all this equipment and set it up. But I did have a spare room in my basement with a little air hockey table on it. And I set up a couple plants on there and started filming that, and absolutely fell in love with that process. And that was pretty much the end of me filming any kind of landscape work. I pretty much dived completely into the plant stuff. From there, I managed to get some notoriety with some of the videos that I made, and got invited to work on a couple different documentary series, which eventually led to a spot working on Green Planet, which I worked on that for about 3 years. And that kind of work, I think, is what I'm best known for, is the long-term time-lapse, whether I'm filming a plant for, like a really quick shoot, like a 1.5 week long mushroom, or maybe cactuses, forming roots in the ground, which can be, 6 to 8 months worth of filming. But by and large, that's really where my dedication has been, is towards the studio time-lapse. I had seen some of the stuff that was done on documentary series like BBC, The Private Life of Plants, and absolutely thought it was just mind-blowing how they did that. And it really just kind of became a passion project of mine to figure out how to do that. And eventually, ended up working on Green Planet with the same people who shot those sequences that I thought were so amazing back in the day. So it's definitely been an interesting career. It's a very interesting and very frustrating job at times, because plants are kind of like children and puppies. If you want to get a good photo of them, you got to be you really have to pay attention to what you're doing. And the plants never want to behave. They don't want to grow where you're expecting them to grow. They will grow out of frame. So you have to be able to adapt to the movement of the plants and adapt to their growth patterns, and be able to really shift your timescales on filming almost nonstop too. So there's a lot of playing with time intervals and things like that in order to capture it. But it's something I absolutely fell in love with, and still continue to do as much as I can.
Very cool. Actually sounds more like a child on top of a puppy, like even harder.
Yes.
So that's interesting. So you basically, when you get when a production company asks you to film a specific plant growing, you said you do it in studio now. So you have to recreate that environment. How does that work? So you go out and you kind of rip it out of the ground and have to mimic everything, like the whole.
Yeah, when I was working on the National Park series, I would actually have them fill Home Depot buckets worth of material and ship it to me. And that way I could actually recreate it with the proper material from the location. Because these documentary series, they're very picky about things. You can't just put a bunch of ferns in the background and expect people to buy into it. You have to have the right kind of ferns from the right kind of region. And the same goes with everything else, the moss, the ground material, any kind of sticks, barks, wood, stuff like that. So as much of it as I'd try to recreate in the studio, it would become very challenging to make a really massive set. I was working on, there's a new documentary series. Gosh, I really wish I knew the title of it at this moment. I posted on my Instagram about it recently, but it's going to be coming out. And it was probably one of the largest sets that I built. They wanted a springtime European just explosion of life. And the footage came out absolutely awesome. But the set was probably about 15 by 15 feet. And I'm just shooting an area, not that large. And you have to build it out really big because you don't want to have to use any green screen if you can avoid it, or chroma key work, just because that adds expense and everything. And then one of the issues you run into then is all of your sets are always kind of like bowled in. So it can give a little bit of a claustrophobic sense if you're not careful. But yeah, so I'd have to make these really huge, elaborate sets. I'd have to run all these hydroponic plumbing lines or watering lines, and it would become a real beast in order to maintain these sets. And it wasn't so much just for the subject I was shooting, but to keep the rest of the set alive. And then you always have to worry about possible contamination with insects, mites, aphids, things like that. So it's one of those things where the entire process feels more of like catastrophe management than filming. Because you constantly have to be aware of problems before they're going to happen. But yeah, building those sets can definitely be very time consuming.
That, of course, at some point led you to like a virtual production, right?
Yeah. It was probably about a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit longer. There was a company called Exebo that had a pan tilt system, and they advertised that it would work with Unreal Engine. And I just immediately leapt at it because this is something that I didn't expect that was going to happen pretty much ever. So you see the virtual production sets, and they're those really large, elaborate sets, and you have all these different people working on them, 15, 20 people to keep that thing up and going. Then you also have the actors, you have the talent, you have everybody else that's involved in the production. And it looks a little bit overwhelming because it's such a huge thing. When I saw that, I realized that I could actually do my work the same way as that, but on a much smaller scale. So I started diving into that and trying to figure that out because, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes your sets will end up kind of being bowled in, and it gives a little bit of sense of claustrophobia. If you're filming something about the size of a softball, it's kind of hard to build about 30, 40 feet of set back with it. Especially if I'm going to be filming, different types of locations for production. They might have me filming something that looks like it's in the desert and then something that looks like it's in a tropic area. And building out, maintaining, and taking down those sets becomes very problematic. So the idea of being able to have a display that would actually show the whole backdrop and a display that interacts with the position of the camera in order to present it to me where it looks correct was just an enormous appeal. So I dived right into it, and the system from Maximo worked fairly well. But at some point, I realized that I could actually get Dragon Frame to send the motor position directly to Unreal Engine as well. And for me, that was huge because now I have these tower robots, which are, I believe, 7-axis degree of freedom robots. I've got ones like Sarah and Dan is another one that I have. And being able to take and move a camera around in that complete freedom rather than just being on a slider was definitely a huge advantage. And even just having a camera on a slider, though, and using a TV for the backdrop, there is an enormous amount of things that you can do. It's a huge time saver, it's a huge space saver, and it's a huge cost reduction. It really is. It's a win-win-win all the way across the board.
So where did Eric come in with a new CineShooter and helping him develop that?
So the CineShooter, at this point, it had been out, and I ended up working with Eric on the development of the CineShooter macro, because I was doing a lot of really high precision macro work at that time, filming things at the cellular level of a plant. And we had been discussing basically we would chat from time to time, and like Eric said, we built good friendship out of this. But I wanted to see if they'd be willing to do like an integration with Unreal Engine. So something that he wanted me to try out first was to work with a tracking system, and I did that, and I got it set up, and it actually worked okay. The problem I was running into with it, though, is if you're running a tracking system, for me, I need to keep that tracking system locked in for months at a time, and that became very problematic. If I was doing a really quick shoot that was maybe like a day or so, it wasn't too big of a problem. But the situation is sometimes these cameras would move so slightly between turns that the tracking system didn't actually pick up that it had moved. So if it stopped getting moved, eventually it falls asleep. So would have to build like agitation devices to keep everything from falling asleep. So when he said that they were going to start working on a method of doing it to where it would talk directly to Unreal, I was really excited about that, because then I no longer need to worry about a tracking system in an area as small and confined as this. And I don't have to worry about the equipment going to sleep. And so far, everything has absolutely worked wonderfully. I can run a shoot for weeks or months at a time without having to worry about it just failing because of the long duration itself.
Eric, for you, I guess the business has changed a lot over the last, 15 years. I mean, like, a lot of people know Kessler for cranes, which I think you still have it in the domain name, Kessler Crane. And then you moved on to become, like making really the best sliders in the market. And that, like a lot of time-lapse stuff, a lot of people associate those amazing time-lapse films like Timescapes with Kessler. But the market has changed, right? It was a bit of a trend, and now it's really virtual production. So how was that journey for you, and how did you end up, like making that new product, which I guess is a completely new area for you?
Right. Yeah, it absolutely is. Really, it was the same thing we've always done, and listen to customers, and especially trying to find one or two, three maybe customers that are doing kind of pioneering what is new on the market. Tom Lowe and Timescapes, that was kind of the beginning of motion time lapse, was really developing in our industry. And so Tom and I were already good friends just from him being a customer of ours. And it was almost the same situation back then that how Chris and I are working together right now. He was, I don't know if you go back to all the old videos of Tom and I together, it was, I need gear that does this. And so we would go to work on it until we got it right. And there's a lot of in the field I had with Tom Lowe developing that and trying to achieve the shots that he was wanting to get for Timescapes. And it was the same thing with Chris. So, we're not Unreal Engine experts over here. I don't know if anybody really is at this point. I think it's that new. But there's a lot of people that are really pouring a lot of time in, like Chris is. And so I had asked Chris, would you be willing to kind of coach our engineers exactly what you want and how you want it to perform? And he took us up on that. And so, most of our integration is, obviously the engineers implemented it, but it was Chris behind the scenes telling them exactly what he wanted, how he wanted it to work, and it's going to continue to grow. So right now, I think Chris is happy, but I think there's also quite a few more bells and whistles that you want, right, Chris?
Yeah.
So we're going to continue on that. It's in its infancy right now. We're getting ready to release another software, hopefully here in the next few months, of our auto tracking. Then we're going to come back to Unreal. Right now, we're letting our tracker list integration work out in the field to get more feedback. And Chris is going to continue to, give us his feedback and his wants and needs as his work changes, so that way we can grow alongside of him.
Very cool. So we look at the CineShooter Plus, so somebody who hasn't used a motion control head like that before, who are the people you would recommend this to, and what kind of shots would they able to get that they might not even have thought about before?
We're trying to build a motion control system that is for everyone. That's why we offer Mac, PC, iOS, phone apps for both Android and Apple. We also have onboard controls and PS4 interface. We're going to be adding more stuff as we go forward. We really want anybody that wants to move a camera and needs it done precisely and the repeatability to be accurate. So it kind of shots everything from product shooting to just having a B cam, automation, live events, anything from churches to concerts. we're trying to build our software and our devices to accommodate anybody that isn't going handheld.
Very cool. Chris, if somebody like an average DP, like me, would be interested in starting with like on a budget virtual production, is that something that's achievable? And I'm not talking about planned time lapses. I'm more talking about like product shots and that kind of stuff, where, like instead of putting a watch on top of Mount Everest, can I do that in here in that studio?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the beauty of working with virtual production. It takes so many things and just makes them easier. Like I mentioned earlier, you'll see that, in the stages of like Lucasfilm or Marvel, where you have all these people working on it. It looks like this huge technological challenge in order to get through, but it's really not. Most DPs, most photographers, most cinematographers, people look at things that they are currently doing and they're just as intimidated by that. Like, I don't know if I could ever do that. That looks like a lot. So when it comes to it, it's basically just learning little steps along the way. And it's something that is completely manageable by one person. And it also makes it your work can be so incredibly fast. So you don't need a giant LED volume, especially if you're doing smaller tabletop work, like time lapse, or if you're going to be doing product work. I'm actually got a shoot that I'm planning on working on a little bit later today, where I'm going to be out of the greenhouse and I'm going to be up in the Arctic somewhere with a nice snow field, filming something that has to do with cold. And for that, it's really just, bringing in a new environment and then putting it up there and then dressing up the foreground. It's very fast. It's very easy to do. It is a little bit intimidating when you first start looking into it. One of the problems I ran into when I first dove into this was I did not even know what questions I should be asking. And it took quite some time to really sort that out. But once I sorted it out, I kind of saw the wizard behind the curtain. And it really isn't that difficult to do this work. You don't have to be an engineer. You don't have to be a software engineer. You don't have to be some tech expert. Anybody can learn how to do this. And they can absolutely be done on a budget. You don't need $10,000 to get started. You really just need a few thousand. And you can already start creating realistic environments and blending them in with your motion control system. If you have equipment from Kessler, the beauty is that their Chaos now integrates with Unreal and does it in a very nice way and offers a lot of flexibility. So you're not just simply moving a camera around. You got quite a few different options of things that you can do to also interact with the environment, move your location around and things like that. So this can absolutely be done on a budget for far less than most people would ever imagine. And anybody can learn how to do this.
So if I were to start this and I get a CineShooter Plus, I get a couple screens, I guess, and I need to somehow connect them to the computer and Unreal Engine. And how do I get those backgrounds?
So basically, all you really need is like maybe a mid-level gaming PC. I have 4 virtual production stages now at this point in my studio, and all of them are just run on about a $1,500 computer. Then all you need is a large TV. You don't even need more than one, because if you're using a smaller subject, you can always spin the subject and you can spin the entire planet around it. So you can kind of simulate that the camera has the ability to whip all the way around and do a full 360 orbit around your subject, which is really nice. In order to get the backdrops, a lot of these are readily available right on Epic Games at their marketplace. And every month they'll have certain assets that are there for free, and it's just free for that month. And every single month I set myself a reminder. I go in and knock all those out. And now I have one that looks like, it's like a fun house. I don't know what I'm going to do with that yet, but I'm definitely going to do something with it. So, and if you need an environment that's custom tailored, the beauty about Unreal is you can go in and you can get an environment that already exists, and then you can start reworking it into something of what you need. Or there is a case with, I was doing a production for America's National Parks, and they wanted it to be filmed in a very specific area, which is very, very unique. And I don't want to give what that area is, but it's a very unique area. I was able to go in and actually build out enough of a set that just from whole cloth that looked just like the area. So building these environments isn't really difficult. There's a little bit of a learning curve with it, but once you get the basics, you don't have to master it in order to have an enormous amount of control to manipulate it. So yeah, it can be definitely be done on a very small budget, and it's amazing how much it can expand your capabilities.
Eric, your ethos has always been, correct me if I'm wrong, but making quite high-end equipment attainable for, more like average filmmakers, because the kind of stuff that you've made mainstream have always been very expensive before, right? And I think motion control is one of those things which for the longest time was something where you think of super high-end devices that are really only in broadcast studios. What's your thought process behind that, and where do you think, well, how do you manage to do that actually? Because it's like it's kind of disruptive to go into this market, but you also need to educate your audience that actually now they can have those things for a lot less money actually.
Right. Well, one of the methods is volume. In order to reduce cost, a lot of times new technologies come out, they're built in very low volume. And so the amount of engineering that goes in behind developing the first ones is quite high. We just take the risk that if we do it right and, we take the risk of buying the high volume in hopes that by bringing the cost down, that it makes it obtainable for a larger group of people. Therefore, we can, still make the profit that we need to keep the doors open and supply those products to the people who need them. That's really what it comes down to, is just trying to get the volume up high enough to where it is affordable. After I got to build one or two of something and you have months or years of engineering behind it, you have to recoup that engineering in just a few sales. So, which is how a lot of things started, like back with Star Wars and motion control. But now we just take the guess that we think that we're going to sell X amount of units. So we're just going to buy all of that up front, which greatly reduces the cost because we can amortize the amount of engineering that went in over thousands of units versus maybe 10 or 20. So that's really the main method there, is that we just take that approach, and we do a lot of the design and actually all the design and manufacturing in-house. That greatly reduces cost as well. We have a full machine shop here. The circuit boards are made about an hour from here. So everything's made here in the States. It's very controlled. The other benefit to that is we have a lot of flexibility so that when people like Chris comes along and wants changes, and we do the engineering in-house and then machining in-house and pretty much all the assembly in-house and all the processes, we can quickly switch and change things up and start catering to whatever's new that's coming out. And Chris, how long did we have developing maybe about 5-6 months, getting the integration just right for Unreal?
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah. So from starting of talks to releasing that software was, relatively quick, considering, how long those processes would normally take for subcontracting. I pretty much hand the reins over to Chris to work with Bruce and Terry directly on that, and let him just kind of say, I want this. This is the, what the work I'm doing, and these are the features I want. And they would go back and forth and try things, and Chris would give them feedback as this is working, this isn't quite right, and Bruce would just chip away at that until he got it right the way that Chris wanted.
Very cool. So actually, you're kind of ahead of the curve in a way that you're kind of bringing, where you don't have to bring manufacturing back because you've never been gone from the States, right? It's right there.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Very cool. So, but you must have a thought about how big that market is, right, for you guys. I mean, like the whole virtual production thing, I think for most people is still, that's why, thanks for the explanation on how to attain that on a budget. But I think most people still have in their minds that they don't even think about that it's a possibility for them to achieve in their own studio. And this is something I think that is changing now with a lot of different technologies, including yours. So you must have had some research or thought process of where you think this will be in a couple of years from now. Do you think everybody with a small studio will have a little virtual production environment?
If that question's for me, I absolutely think that, especially after working with Chris and him explaining and showing how easy and affordable it is to do it. I think it's just a matter of education, getting out there that you don't need a lot of money. The learning curve is short. I think it's going to do what time-lapse did. Time-lapse was, prior to the digital camera, was, almost, I wouldn't say impossible, but it was very expensive, and time, took a lot of time to get those time lapses. You didn't know what you had. You had all the development of film, the cost of film, the digitizing of film. And so as soon as the DSLR came, it made it available and affordable. And you knew exactly what you had. And so the quality and production value went up greatly on, time-lapse acquisitions of assets. And Chris is kind of one of those guys that's showing you, a lot of people that you don't need a lot of money to get this up and going. And it's pretty straightforward, especially if you follow people like him. He'll show you how to do it. And I think that's going to be the future. Instead of having a lot of time and effort put into set building and backdrops and things like that, you're going to just use a couple of very large TVs, and you can change up your set same day for multiple different shoots.
Yeah, if you have a studio, there really is no reason not to be putting something like this in, even if it's a small deployment, which is, say, like a 75-inch screen. Just because of the flexibility and the power of what you can do with it, would absolutely make sense to take just one little corner of that studio and just turn it into a little mini virtual production stage. If you have something small that you want to shoot, you don't really need a large area, but this will feel like like you have an entire world that you can play with to shoot it. So yeah, anybody, if you're not looking into this, you really should be looking into this, because I do see within probably like 5 years, most people with a studio are going to have a little virtual production studio that they can work with in order to complement all the other work that they do.
Very cool. Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to replacing that actual background with a screen at some point.
Right. And Tony Reilly, he's another asset and resource to watch. He uses short throw projectors. And I don't know if you're doing much of that, Chris, or not, but he's doing more of live shooting, and he's using a short throw projector, and that's working out great. So I think it's next level DV, and he'll show you, through his channels how he's using the short throw projector instead of TVs for larger sets.
Cool. Well, I think it's a little bit early to announce, but the three of us have been talking about ways to educate the audience on that thing, on how to make virtual production on a budget. So please stay tuned to CineD to learn more, I guess soonish, but it's a little bit too early to announce. But let's get back to the CineShooter Plus. Eric, can you give us, like the nerdy rundown of specs as well, and also talk a little bit about pricing and availability?
Sure. The pricing is the same as the original CineShooter, so I think it's $3,000 and $3,200 for the macro version. So what we did is we updated the screen to an OLED. The big improvement that we did was we worked with our motor manufacturer, and they designed a new gearbox. It's a enveloping helical gearbox that reduces noise, and it also tightened up the lash inside those gears quite a bit. So it's a much quieter, smoother, and more precise motor than we've ever used before. So that's the big improvement there. And then also it is Unreal Engine ready. So our Chaos software works with that head, and we optimize the electronics in there to do that. And so that's available through the Chaos software. That will give you the Unreal integration. Chris has a beautiful tutorial on that, on showing how to get it set up and running very quickly.
And you said there's a macro version, and I guess there's also a normal version, the difference being the sound level?
Well, yeah. The sound will be different only because the gearing is different in that head. We developed the macro head specifically for Chris. He was one of the more demanding customers. His shots sometimes are, what are they, as short as maybe a few millimeters, or, some of your cellular shots. So just try to envision shooting, the width of a cell is your entire scene, So I think that was some of the stuff that Chris was doing. So it had to be extremely precise and geared way down. And so we came up with a gear ratio that was suitable for him, and that is our macro head. So if you're doing a lot of macro work, but because it's geared so low, the motors spin up much higher. So it does produce larger noise. It's still not, I don't consider it noisy, especially if you're using it for macro use at all. But if you try to whip it full speed, which it still will, the motor speed will be roughly 4 times that of a standard head. So I would recommend a standard head for traditional shooting, like, if you're doing interviews or you're doing normal motion control where you're not needing that macro function. That will be just fine for those type of people. But if you're doing more specific work like Chris, the macro head is definitely going to be the way to go. Or you're shooting extremely long lenses, macro is going to be better for that as well.
Well, availability, I guess people can order it now.
Absolutely, yeah.
Very nice. Guys, anything you want to add before we wrap it off?
No, I guess on the Kessler side, stay tuned. We are still working on some new projects, some new software features that hopefully will be coming out here in the next few months. And we have a new motion control device also coming out that will be an addition to the family that we currently have. And we continue to grow.
Very nice, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for continuing to invest in all of us filmmakers and really expanding the possibilities for everybody. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. Stay tuned to CineD for a lot more gear news and review videos. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks.